Good evening, friends, and shalom, and welcome to this episode of the Watchdog, exclusively on the Synagogue News. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times. Want to go ahead and say thank you to everybody who is currently here. I see Doki Doki and Kevin's Biblical Discussions in the live chat. Thank you both for being here. Please remember, those of you who are here or watching this video after the fact, to like and share this video, as well as consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, and hitting that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Excuse me. Also, please consider liking us on any of the various social media platforms which you frequent. I am on Parler, Gab, Twitter, Minds, and Facebook. You can find me with the tag The Synagogue. I will have a different display name on each of these various websites, but nonetheless, if you do look up the tag The Synagogue, you will be able to find me. And I appreciate anybody who would be following me there, as well as sharing this to those various platforms. I would like to remind you guys also to please consider, excuse me, sorry about this. I have a little bit of a pop up here. Let me get rid of that. Right. Anyways, back to what I was saying. I'd like to remind you guys also to please consider getting on Rumble. All of these videos post after the fact to Rumble, and that is our backup channel, the Synagogue on Rumble, just in case there does end up being a necessity to have a backup channel. We all know that Google and the internet overlords do not like free speech. They are very much opposed to the idea of free speech, and we have already been censored on this channel before. So if we do end up getting censored, not only can you catch the censored videos on Rumble, but on top of that, if we ever get banned entirely, you can just catch the show on Rumble, which may or may not end up being important at some point in time. So please consider getting on Rumble as well. Also, want to say, even though we are on all the different social media platforms, we want to specifically endorse Rumble, or excuse me, Rumble is one of them, but nonetheless, Gab, Parler, and Minds. Of course, we are appreciative of alternative social media platforms which do actually go out of their way to defend internet free speech. If you are also interested in the defense of internet free speech, then please consider following us on those websites in particular. Not that I'm opposed to anybody having a Twitter or Facebook. I'm obviously on both of those as well. But nonetheless, we want to make sure that we are letting people know that we indeed do defend internet free speech. And of course, we can't trust the government to do that. We can't actually trust the institutions that have already demonstrated to us that they are going to have excuse me, get rid of all the different free speech platforms that we have here or make them less free or stuff like that. We can't trust these guys. Who can we trust? Well, we don't necessarily know, but we can at least try to move with some of these organizations that have claimed they are going to defend our free speech online. So please consider getting on those various websites. Excuse me. Also, would like to remind you guys that you can contribute to us financially if you fancy. If indeed you do fancy, you can give a one-time donation to the PayPal. Links to the PayPal will be floating around in the live chat here at some point. Also, if you would like to be a monthly subscriber, you can do that through the Patreon. Links to the Patreon will also be floating around here in the live chat at some point. We appreciate anybody who does decide to give to either of those platforms. What you are doing when you do that is not only putting forward your faith in me, right, saying that you think I have earned the right to turn this into a full-time career, but you're also putting your faith in the news that I am actually putting out, right? Which I certainly do appreciate. There is a glut of news, there's a glut of podcasts, there's a glut of YouTube channels. And so if you guys are sitting here and actually saying, hey, we like CJ, we want to pay him because we think he is actually giving us honest content, we think that he is actually putting forward a good product. That's a pretty big leap of faith for you. That's a pretty big voting with your dollar, so to speak, right? And so I appreciate anybody who does decide to do that. Again, links will be floating in the live chat there for that. Last thing we do for channel housekeeping is our This Days in Histories. And on this day, November the 3rd, 1493, Christopher Columbus had first seen the island of Dominica, which is located there in the Caribbean Sea, and indeed was one of the first areas discovered in the New World by Europeans. Now, of course, when we talk about discovery of the New World by Europeans, it is important for us to remember two things. Number one, there is evidence that people who were not the Spanish had been here well before. One of the most famous ones is Leif Erikson, who is said to have actually landed in Greenland and may have even gotten as far as Minnesota, although that is at this point just in the realm of speculative history. There's never been any demonstration of that in a conclusive way, but some people have claimed as much. Also, there is evidence on the other side of the continent, namely California and Baja California, that perhaps the Chinese may have been here as long as 1,000 years ago, which would be pretty impressive if that is true. The second thing, of course, is that we are talking specifically about discovered by outside peoples, right? Obviously, there was already quite a bit of people living here at the time, namely the Native Americans, and they had discovered this place long ago, very long ago, back when the Bering Strait was actually still connecting both North America and South America, or excuse me, not South America, Asia, not South America, my apologies, North America and Asia. For those who don't know, the running theory as it stands right now, which appears to be correct, is that there were people coming over from what would be modern day Russia, crossing over that Bering Strait, which was actually not yet covered by water, into Alaska, and then working their way down south to eventually populate the entire North American and South American continent, and of course, eventually the Caribbean as well. But nonetheless, November the 3rd, 1493, Christopher Columbus did actually spot the island of Dominica, which again is in the Caribbean. And many of you guys may not actually know what exactly Dominica is, because of course there's so many different small islands in that area. But it is one of the ones that's farther to the east and south, really close to South America. I can't remember what that country is that it's right above. I believe it might be Peru. But my South American geography is not particularly great. But nonetheless, we like to give you guys a quick this day in history kind of thing. I also want to have a brief discussion before we get into the articles today. So, what's that brief discussion going to be about? Well, Kanye West has recently uh, shared some relatively anti Semitic views that he apparently has. And Kyrie Irving, basketball player for the Brooklyn Nets, has shared some of the same. Now, are either of these two men genuinely anti Semitic? I don't know. I don't really care. I want to use the fact that they have said these things as an opportunity to say three different things. Number one, we as conservatives need to be sure that we are not throwing our weight behind people who are kind of deplorable. I warned back in 2016, and not to brag, but it has since come to fruition, that our support of people who were flagrantly immoral, like, for example, the former President Donald Trump, was going to come back to bite us in the ass and was going to take us off of the high ground and make us more comfortable enduring. Had lots of conservatives throwing their weight behind people like Elon Musk, Boris Johnson over in the UK, Kanye West is another one, Caitlyn Jenner is another one. Quite a bit of people out here who have just decided that they are going to start supporting not so very good people. And obviously, that's not something that we can uh, support as conservatives. If we are truly supporting the conservative way of life, if we are truly supporting the traditional political values, religious values, and etc. of Western civilization, then we cannot be compromising our position on the moral high ground by throwing our political weight and cultural weight behind people who are kind of deplorable. That's the first thing I want to say. And Kanye West is just demonstrating of just another perfect example of him being that kind of person, as we all already kind of knew he was. The second thing I want to say is we as conservatives need to learn how to distinguish between supporting what people say and people's right to say what they say, right? So I am Jewish. I am obviously not a fan of anti Semitic comments coming from Kanye West or coming from Kyrie Irving or coming from anybody else for that matter, because that is specifically an attack on my people, not just an attack on some generic people out there, not an attack on even some people who I know. It's an attack on my people in particular, just as an attack on the Scottish or an attack on white people or an attack on Americans would also be an attack on my people, right? And I'm sure many of you guys have experienced the same. So clearly, I disapprove of the different things that Kyrie and Kanye have said. However, Kyrie and Kanye do have a right in this country to say the things that they have said, and they should not be threatened with the canceling of their bank accounts or destruction of their careers because they have shared views which they genuinely believe. And this is something which I think very many people struggle with. Um, we do not support everything people say just because we support their right to say it. Our support of their right to say it is nothing more than our support for the freedom of speech, which we believe is so vital to a free society, or at least which I believe is so vital to a free society. And frankly, it expands to things much greater than simply saying black people are the true Jews, which I definitely do not believe, of course, right? But people have asked, well, what about somebody like Anjem Chowdhury, who believes in Islamic law, Sharia law, right? Who believes that kind of thing should be enforced here in the West? Does he have a right to say the things that he says? And the answer is, of course he does. Of course he does. Do we believe in freedom of speech or don't we? I do. I very genuinely do. And while I plan to lock swords with Anjem Chowdhury in the intellectual field of battle, I still think he has a right to draw his weapon. You guys see what I'm saying here? Obviously, we're talking metaphorically, not in real weapons, although in his case, he might be talking about real weapons. The same thing applies to Kyrie and Kanye here. Do I disapprove of, disavow, disappreciate, come out against, etc., 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 all the different things which Kanye West and Kyrie Irving have said they believe? I do. However, am I deeply bothered by the fact that they were blacklisted from social media, by the fact that Kyrie Irving has been suspended for sharing his honest beliefs, or in this case, just endorsing a documentary on Twitter, by the fact that Kanye West has had his bank accounts frozen by banks that don't want to do business with him anymore? Yes, I am. I am incredibly bothered by these things. And you should be bothered by these things as well. We're either for free speech or we're not. And at least on this channel, we are indeed for free speech. And that includes detestable speech, with the exception of incitement to violence or harassment of individuals or other things of that nature, very limited nature. With the exception of those things, people do have a right to say the things that they believe, to endorse documentaries which they seek to endorse, to share tweets which they seek to share. We should not be on the side that says no, because eventually that's going to come back to bite us, right? So that's everything I wanted to say on that. It's a little bit of a long rant, but nonetheless, I feel like it is something that needs to be said. I feel like people struggle mightily to distinguish between those things. We have conservatives on one side saying that this is we can't be defending these people because of the things they say, and then we have conservatives on another side saying no, what they're saying is correct, and really the middle ground is correct. We should be defending their right to say these things while also acknowledging that what they say could very often be wrong, or even in this case evil, and those aren't contradictory things. As the famous French philosopher Voltaire once said, I disagree with what you say, but I will die for your right to say it. And that needs to be our mentality as well. I will die for your right to worship as you see fit, to speak the things which you seek to speak, to carry firearms even if you're on the other side of me politically. Rights do not look through any sort of black colored glasses or brown colored glasses or white colored glasses or Christian colored glasses or Muslim colored glasses or etc. Rights are rights because we are human beings made in the image of God, not because people say things we happen to agree with. In fact, if freedom of speech only defends things which we agree with, well, then it's not really freedom of speech at all. Now, is it? Anyways, friends, that's the whole thing that we have here. Um, Looks like Chris Lucas is also here as well. Says he'll be doing a show Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, which is New York time. It'll be his birthday as well as Guy Fawkes Day. I do apologize, Chris, but I actually won't be able to attend that as I will be doing a debate about that time and then an after show after my own debate. But nonetheless, this Saturday, if anybody does want to join, I'll at least give you a shout out. This Saturday, if anybody does want to join Chris Lucas, he will be doing a program, it looks like, at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, so today's entire show will be dedicated to Ammon Bundy, independent candidate for governor of Idaho. And basically, we're going to go through some of his different issues, what he believes, all that kind of stuff. We're going to be basically looking over his website. Um, and I'm going to be telling you guys why I am voting for Ammon Bundy, and why not only should you be voting for Ammon Bundy if you live in the state of Idaho, but why you should also be voting for somebody with similar views to Ammon Bundy if you are not in the state of Idaho. So if you don't live in the state of Idaho, this isn't actually just for people living here, although I obviously want to reach people here. This is for you as well, because we're going to be talking about different political issues, where we stand on these political issues, why I think you guys should stand with me on these political issues. And obviously, it's going to be a good deal of fun and hopefully informative. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So, why I am voting for Ammon Bundy. For those who do not know, Ammon Bundy is a gubernatorial candidate independent of any political party. He was running for governor here in the state of Idaho. The election for governor, as well as for senators and representatives and a whole bunch of other stuff, all across the country, is in 5 days from now. Today is November the 3rd, 2022. So that is November the 8th, 2022. By the way, there's going to be another blood moon on that day. Fun fact for those of you who don't know. Um, and Bundy is famous for leading a couple of armed resistances to the federal government. One in 2014, when the Bureau of Land Management came to try and take his father's land in Nevada, and one in 2016, when him and a group of militiamen took control of a federal wildlife reserve to try and demand the release of a couple of ranchers who had been arrested for burning up some tumbleweeds and stuff like that on federal land, and ended up actually having success, even though Ammon and the other organizers did end up being in prison for 2 years. It was eventually ruled that they did nothing wrong. So ended up serving 2 years in prison for nothing. And on top of that, President Trump ended up pardoning the Hammond, I believe it was Hammond, brothers, or father and son. I can't exactly remember what their relation to each other was, but nonetheless, the people who were arrested for their ranching violations, Trump did end up pardoning them. Not that I think Trump is super interested in ranchers' freedom, but he is a populist and he does do what people scream about loud enough, right? So those are the things which made Ammon Bundy popular. He then also had another large uptake in his popularity when he decided to resist, this time not with weapons, but nonetheless to resist the COVID-19 lockdowns. He had been actually arrested a couple of times in 2020 and 2021 for being unwilling to wear a mask, for being unwilling to leave the Idaho legislature, and therefore being charged with trespassing, for organizing a protest outside of I believe it was a police precinct, but nonetheless, to protest this cop who had actually recently arrested a mother who had her son at the park over there in Meridian, Idaho, and a couple other things that he had done actually before he had, decided he's going to run for governor of Idaho. I've also had an interview with the gubernatorial candidate, which I highly advise you guys check out. In fact, I'll definitely be leaving a link in the live chat to that. And if you guys are watching this after the live showing, then I'll actually be leaving a link in the description as well. I really just need to get generally better at putting links in my descriptions and stuff like that. But nonetheless, we had an interview with gubernatorial candidate Ammon Bundy, and I've also met him a couple of other times. Very good guy. I think just absolutely excellent person, in fact, in my own opinion. Not only morally, but also just in terms of his integrity and in terms of his political positions. And so we're going to go over a lot of the different stuff that he believes today, like I said, and I'm going to be discussing why I believe you should vote for him if you're in the state of Idaho, or why I believe you should vote for people like him if you are not in the state of Idaho. And let me go ahead and drop this link now in the live chat, while I also get his website here, which is votebundy.com. So there's that portion there. And then here is this Oh, I just went to my StreamYard and it didn't look like it was up. Tell me, guys, if it's actually up for you, um, because I can't actually see. That's weird. Why is it doing that? There we go. All right. Now I know everything's sharing. So this is votebundy.com. We're going to go through some of the different key elements of his campaign and the different things that he believes. As you can see, we have top 5 reasons to support Ammon Bundy for governor, 3 lies the media has told you about Ammon Bundy, and my plan, which of course is his plan. Um, Read the Keep Idaho, Idaho plan. That is his slogan, namely Keep Idaho, Idaho, like I said. So, first thing we're going to do is look at the top 5 reasons to support Ammon Bundy. This gentleman right here in the cowboy hat is, in fact, the gubernatorial candidate, Ammon Bundy. And this is some of the different things that he believes. And I'm, of course, going to be talking about why I support these things. Also, I see Cryptomaria in the live chat as well. Shalom, and thank you very much for being here. So, these are the top 5 reasons to vote for Ammon Bundy, according to his own website. First one he talks about here is elimination of property tax. Now, this, of course, is state property tax. Obviously, he would have no power to eliminate any sort of federal property tax, although I don't actually know if the federal government has a property tax. I'd have to look into that, but I don't think that they do. I believe the federal government only has, at least as far as us small time citizens are concerned, a income tax. I know they have, like a corporate tax and business taxes, stuff like that. But for those of us who are regular folk, although I guess business owners are also regular folk, for the most part, this is going to be the only tax that impacts us federally is the income tax. But nonetheless, elimination of the state property tax is one of the different things which Ammon Bundy seeks to do. Now, I personally have a big gripe with the property tax because it essentially means that you don't actually own your property. You own your property kind of in theory, due to the fact that there is a property tax, right? So, why do I say that? Well, if you were to, rent land or lease land from somebody, then of course what you would have to do is pay that somebody typically once a month, but it may be something like once a year or once a contract if it's a leasing sort of thing, right? Pay that somebody for the right to actually use the land that you are using there and putting your business on or living at or whatever it happens to be, right? When you buy your property, of course, you no longer have to do that. Theoretically speaking, you have it, it's yours now, it's your possession. You no longer have to pay anyone for it, and nobody can come and remove you from that land at any point in time because it is in fact your land. Well, notice I said theoretically, because as it turns out, that's not actually the case. As it turns out, you actually do have to continuously pay for that land all the way until the day that you die because of property taxes. At least this is the way it is in most states. Certain states like Florida, Nevada, Texas don't actually have a property tax, and definitely more power to them. I would like Idaho to be the same. I'm sure many of you guys would like your respective states to be the same also. Well, Ammon Bundy here in Idaho would like to eliminate the property tax. Let's go ahead and read a little bit about what he actually says here. Property tax is the most immoral of all taxes because it is the state's way of deifying itself by claiming that it owns everything and forcing you to pay an annual tax on property that is supposed to be yours. But if you have to pay a tax on it, how is it actually yours? And of course, that is exactly accurate, right? If you have to pay the government money to possess this land, under the threat of no longer possessing the land if you don't actually pay them the money, then in what way do you actually own it? You don't own it. If anything, you are leasing it from the state. You're leasing it from your individual state, whether that be, California, New York, Vermont, all these other different kinds of states, Massachusetts, right, so on and so forth. These are the states which actually, would tell you, hey, you don't actually own your land. We own your land, and you are basically leasing your land from us. Hence why you have to pay us for it, or we're going to come and confiscate it and kick you off it and potentially even shoot your dog and kids. Cough, cough, Randy Weaver, cough, cough. Although that wasn't actually over property taxes. I just want to let you guys know that the government will definitely do that to you. Anyways, back to the article here. He says, key to my Keep Idaho, Idaho plan is the elimination of all property taxes in our state. And let me say, if you're in the state of Idaho, that should be something you definitely wish to accomplish here. And if you're not in the state of Idaho, that should be something which you definitely want in your state as well. You should be asking your governor, your county commissioners, mayors, city council members, local state senators, and state representatives. Hey, you're not going to get my vote unless you are willing to do something about the fact that the government can come take 6% of the value of my property every year under the threat of violence, which is what all laws are effectively, is the threat of violence, right? In taking away my land at the point of a gun, right? If I don't decide to pay this. Obviously, very detestable, very disgusting, something that is not very good at all. Back to the article, he says, it's very simple, excuse me. Property taxes, excuse me. I'm going to drink my vitamin water here because I am having a very raspy throat. It's very simple, he says. Property taxes are immoral, and we therefore must eliminate them. And that is exactly right. Property taxes are immoral and therefore must be eliminated. There is no better reason. But if you do need a better reason, we believe that people should actually own their property. They should not lease their property from the state. That is not something that is acceptable in a free society. Anyways, property taxes are immoral and we therefore must eliminate them. You can't just lower that which is immoral, it must be eliminated. Eliminating property tax will effectively put about $2,000 back into your pocket every year. But more important than that, it will mean that you finally own that which is rightfully yours and the government can't steal it from you. You either have private property or you have a property tax. You cannot have both. Completely agree. And let me add here as well, and this is especially important for those of us who live in the state of Idaho. Um, this also tremendously reduces the financial burden, not just on small business owners and people who own property, but specifically on farmers, specifically, of course, farmers who own their own land. Many of you may not be aware, but the number of farmers is consistently and constantly going down in this country as farmers are finding it either just financially untenable or perhaps finding more lucrative options outside of the farming industry. They're finding it financially untenable to actually continue to own their land, and so they're selling it to land developers who seek to build apartments and WalMarts and all this other kind of stuff. And therefore, the amount of farmland in the country is going down, and the amount of farming, of course, in the country goes down along with it. Well, if those farmers have a significantly lower financial burden by way of not having to pay the government a certain percentage of their property's value every year, then obviously they're making more money. Obviously, they have greater incentive to remain farmers. We keep farmland, we keep food production, we keep this industry, which is indeed the truly oldest of all industries. Don't let the hookers deceive you. The actual oldest profession is farming. And it's the profession on which all civilization is built. If we don't have our cities, pretty bad things happen, but in the end, we'll continue. If we don't have our farms, civilization as we know it collapses. And farmers have a tremendous tax burden, greater, in fact, than most other property owners because they have more property. Elimination of the property tax dramatically reduces the financial burden placed on farmers and therefore creates a greater incentive for farmers to continue in their farming, to continue to own their land, to pass their land on to their children, and of course, gives them more money in their pocket, which is that same incentive, but is just also to say, they deserve it. They deserve to have more money. I mean, if we're going to be paying athletes, Deshaun Watson can, a serial sexual predator, $250 million guaranteed so he can not play football for the Cleveland Browns, then obviously we should be paying our farmers a pretty decent income as well. A good way to make sure they're getting that income is to make sure that we're not stealing a certain percentage of the value of their property every single year. And that is what taxation is stealing. Obviously, sometimes we do need taxes. I'm not saying that taxes should be entirely eliminated. Unfortunately, we do have to fund the state somehow, right? But it is a necessary evil in the same way that government, in the same way that executions of criminals, in the same way that war are necessary evils, and therefore it should be reduced as much as possible. If you want to be pro-farmer in your respective state, then you want to be anti-property tax. Get rid of the property tax. It is immoral. It is illogical. It should be illegal. And I certainly support gubernatorial candidate Ammon Bundy in his attempt to eliminate the property tax. Point number 2, eliminate the personal income tax. 9 states in America don't have a personal income tax, ranging from highly populated states like Florida and Texas to states with very little population like Wyoming and Alaska. Even our liberal neighbor, Washington, has no personal income tax. Now, notice 9 states in America, that means 41 states in America, Idaho included, but likely your state as well, if you're watching this from a place that is not Idaho, actually do have a personal income tax. 41 states have a personal income tax. That's your income. It's not the state's income. They didn't do anything to generate that income. They didn't do anything to produce whatever it is that you're producing that generated that income. They didn't do anything to generate the labor that you're doing, to generate the services that you're providing, which generates that income. They're stealing from you, but they're not actually doing anything to justify the fact that they're stealing from you. Idaho's personal income tax rate is 6.925% and ranks us at 26th among the 50 states, with higher income tax rates than even liberal states such as Massachusetts, commonly called Taxachusetts by people, so just consider that for a moment, Colorado, or New Mexico. The fact that this tax still exists in Idaho is simply a clear demonstration that Republican leadership in Idaho has not advanced a true conservative agenda in the last 4 decades. And the idea that we can't do this when 9 other states already have simply means that those saying so are either bad at math or simply incompetent. Idaho can do this, and when I'm your governor, we will get rid of personal income tax. That will put an average of $3,300 back into your pocket every year. Now, let's just do some simple math here. Obviously, this will not be accounting for your payment for healthcare if you do that, your social security or federal income tax or anything like that, right? And obviously we're going to be having grossly reduced numbers just for the sake of simplicity. But let's do some math real quick. Let's say that you made $1,000 a year, or $1,000 a month rather, which of course is probably way less than any of us are making, because $1,000 a month would probably not be enough to pay most of our rents. It certainly wouldn't be enough to pay my rent. In fact, at this point, it wouldn't be enough to pay 2/3 of my rent. Um, excuse me. But nonetheless, just for the sake of simplicity, let's say you were making $1,000 every month, right? And 6.925% of that $1,000 every month is going to the state government. All right, so that's $69.25 for those of us who are not particularly great at math. $69.25 over the course of, excuse me, man, my throat is feeling real raspy today. I apologize, friends. $69.25 over the course of 12 months is $831. Now, obviously, of course, people were making, like I said, significantly more than $1,000 every year. At least I hope, or every month, excuse me. At least I hope we are. But this is just for the sake of simplicity. What could you do with 831 extra dollars every month? People talk about, oh, we should have free healthcare. Oh, we should have free preschool. Oh, we should have free college. Oh, we should have universal basic income, all these other different kinds of things. We wouldn't need any of that stuff if the government wasn't stealing our income every week or every bi-week, depending on if you get paid bi-weekly or weekly, or every, twice every month, or once every month, or once a year if you're on salary, or whatever it happens to be, right? If the government wasn't stealing this money from you, you wouldn't quote unquote need, you don't need it anyway, but you wouldn't quote unquote need all of this free stuff because you would already have this stuff. By the way, if 6.925% of $1,000 every year, or every month, excuse me, would come out to $831 a year. Well, you can double 831 if you make $2,000 a year. What's that going to get you? 1,662. Well, what if I make $3,000 every month? 2,493. What if I make $4,000 every month? 3,324, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, this doesn't take into account the fact that you're still being robbed of a certain amount of your income by the federal government and Social Security and all that other kinds of stuff. Understand that, but you still have anywhere from 831 to 3,300 more dollars in your pocket every year if the state itself is not robbing you of your income, right? What could you possibly do with that money. Maybe you want to take a martial arts class. Maybe you want to learn how to play an instrument. Maybe you want to pay for some health care so you can get proper health coverage. Maybe you want to put your children through college. Maybe you want to get a new car because the one you have right now is totaled and was made in 1975 or something like that. Right. Or, obviously, those would be two different scenarios, right? Totaled or made in 1975. I think you guys get the idea, though. What could you do with that money? You could do quite a bit with that money. I sincerely hope none of you are making $1,000 every month. That would be awful. That would just be absolutely awful. My prayers are with you if you're only making $1,000 every month. That's a lot of money that you just don't have. Why? Because the state is deciding to rob you of that money. Because the state is deciding we didn't do anything to provide the products or services that generated this income, but we're going to take 6.925% of that income anyways. And of course, the state says, bite me if you decide to complain about it. Well, we do decide to complain about it. We want to go ahead and eliminate it. Ammon Bundy says that he wants to actually set forward a plan to eliminate that. And I think that such a thing would be absolutely fantastic. And by the way, Cryptomeria says in Canada, income tax is 35 to 45%. Man, is that egregious or what? My prayers go out to you, Cryptomeria. That is rough right there. But in a lot of areas here in the United States, we're really not too far off. And the federal income tax is significantly more than the state income tax is, at least depending on your particular income bracket. I know for the poorer people, it's not quite as bad. But nonetheless, I do digress. So let's go ahead and move on to reason number 3. Implement restitution and restoration laws. This is the third most important reason, according to the Ammon Bundy website, why you should be voting for Ammon Bundy. Our current laws for nonviolent crime is completely out of whack and totally absurd here in Idaho. Many don't realize that Idaho has the highest incarceration rate in the world. You heard that correctly. The highest incarceration rate on the entire planet, the whole planet. There are 49 other states. There are 5 territories. There's the city of Washington, D.C. And then, of course, there are also 195 different countries, at least that are recognized by the United Nations. That includes, of course, or that does not include, of course, countries which are not recognized by the United Nations. Things like Palestine or South Sudan or etc. Right? I don't believe Palestine is a real country, but nonetheless, you guys get the point. And there's no reason for us to incarcerate so many non-violent criminals. Here's how our system works right now. If someone steals an iPhone out of your car and are subsequently caught, we then put that person in jail and force you, the taxpayer, to pay to keep them here. Furthermore, most of the time, you never even get your iPhone back because the system keeps it as evidence in a crime, and so you just get burned, and we end up usually turning a non-violent criminal into a full-fledged violent criminal over time. It makes no sense, and it only serves to exacerbate existing criminality and expand the prison system at a current cost of $283 million per year. And of course, if you're not living in the state of Idaho, you probably have a greater population than we do in Idaho. So even though you probably have a lower incarceration rate than we do in Idaho, that dollar amount is actually probably greater in your state. Anyways, this means it costs Idaho $35,000 per year to house these nonviolent criminals, which is $8,000 more than the median income in Idaho. Does that make any sense to you? As part of my Keep Idaho, Idaho plan, I will implement a system of restitution and restoration for nonviolent crime. It is simple. If someone steals your iPhone, it must be immediately returned to you along with a judgment in your favor for an additional 20% of the value of it. That's it. It's simple. Restitution and restoration. If you're a victim of a nonviolent crime, you get restored plus 20%. Now, for those of us who are Christians, this is something that I think is actually kind of nice. Why? Well, because this is something that he's clearly taking from the scriptures. Now, I don't know if I completely agree that we should eliminate all prison sentencing for nonviolent criminals, but at least the idea of making sure people get their property back, as well as the additional value of their property. So, like, for example, somebody steals $1,000 from you, you get your $1,000 back plus 200, right? That's not only something that I think would be incredibly effective and would reduce the amount of payment we're actually shelling out to keep criminals in prison, but on top of that, it's actually something that derives directly from the Bible. Some of you may know that in Levitical law, if you are if you take somebody's stuff or damage somebody's stuff, it's a little bit more severe in the Bible. It's 4 times the value, but nonetheless you are restored that which you have plus 4 times, or in some instances plus double, right? Depending on if it's something like theft or if it's negligence or something like that. That obviously is a greater benefit to the victim there, who not only gets their stuff back but also gets additional stuff back. But I would also wager to say it's a little bit more of a um, issue, if you will, for the criminal, right? If the criminal is there stealing something, they steal your $1,000 and they have to pay you $1,200 back. Well, it turns out that that didn't work out very well for the criminal. In fact, if anything, they get negative value on their crime. In this instance, crime literally does not pay, right? And there's no necessity for you to be paying for them because they're not sitting in prison for the next 10 years, getting 3 hots in a cot and watching the freaking Teletubbies on television, right? Now, again, is it going to work out simply this way? Probably not. Obviously, some people who steal will not be able to pay that 20% back, in which case there's going to have to be something done with them, probably prison. Obviously, all these things are going to have to be somewhat moderated, which of course is just the case with any different election, right? But nonetheless, suffice it to say, I think this would be an incredibly good idea, at least a good start for an idea. And I totally support the gubernatorial candidate Ammon Bundy in his attempts to implement a restoration and restitution law. Although, again, noting that I don't think we will ever entirely be able to get rid of things like prisons for nonviolent crimes, just because unfortunately not everything is going to work out so peachy keen. It sucks, but it is the real world that we live in. In fact, if you want to look back into the Bible, which you was talking about, how this is explicitly a biblical thing, right? They did have the idea of, essentially, you could call it slavery for the purposes of, those who would not be able to pay or something like that. And I don't actually think that's a bad idea. I mean, we already in this country do allow for people to be punished with labor. So if somebody is unable to pay, if somebody robs $1,000 and they're unable to pay the 1,000 plus 20%, maybe it's not a bad idea for them to have to, work in some way, shape, or form. I don't think that is a bad idea, and I would wonder what Ammon Bundy might think about something like that as well. Now, of course, it is important for us to remember nonviolent means nonviolent. It doesn't mean nonviolent against persons, right? So, for example, if somebody commits vandalism, that is a violent act, even though it wasn't against a person. Somebody shoots your dog, that is a violent act, even though it wasn't against a person. The other thing to consider here, which I will admit is a little bit of a monkey wrench, is we would have to ask the question of, what about things like drug dealing and stuff along those lines. I do plan to hopefully get the gubernatorial candidate back on the show so we can discuss things like that. I think that that'd be some good questions to ask, right? But suffice it to say, I think that this is a solid start for a plan. And while I'm not quite as on board as I would be with the other two, being the eliminations of taxes and stuff like that, I do think that this is a wise plan, and I appreciate that there is actually somebody who is seeking to address the incredibly ridiculous incarceration rate here. And let me just tell you guys a little personal antidote about the incarceration rate here in Idaho. I had a buddy who will go unnamed, who was actually busted stealing from people. Um, so basically, he did this thing which we call up here jockey boxing, and essentially what that is you go out at night when everybody's fast asleep, and you open people's car doors. And this is actually something that I did as a kid as well. Unfortunately, Lord forgive me, but nonetheless, you open people's doors, and a lot of people keep their cars unlocked, and a lot of people keep valuables in those unlocked cars. So you open the doors. If they happen to be locked, you move on. If they happen to be unlocked, you see if there's valuables. If there's none, you move on. If there is, you take them. Boom, you stole from people, right? This person who I know was able to steal quite literally over $10,000 worth of valuables from people over the course of a couple months, ended up getting busted for it. And because there was so little room in the prisons that we have here, because there was so little, because there was so great of an incarceration rate here in the state of Idaho. They were actually considering shipping him out to Texas to actually serve his time in a private prison in Texas for crimes he committed in the state of Idaho because they didn't have anywhere to lodge him. And I had another buddy who similarly had committed crimes. In this case, it was marijuana crimes, which shouldn't be crimes anyways. And they actually had to completely take the idea of incarceration off the table because, again, there was in fact no place to lodge him. Now, I don't know if you guys in your states have ever had a problem with an inability to lodge these criminals, but we have so many people locked up in prisons here in the state of Idaho that that is actually a very real problem, and a problem I have even actually kind of experienced by way of some of my buddies who were in trouble back when we were in high school. Number 4, take back federal land in Idaho. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution of the United States only permits the federal government to own 10 square miles of land for our nation's capital, and any other land which a state legislature sells to the federal government which can be used for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. The federal government has broken this constitutional law and now controls over 61% of all land in Idaho. I've actually heard it, some people say as high as 70%. So I would want to just briefly fact check that just to get the specifics right. But nonetheless, nearly 2/3 of the land in Idaho is owned neither by the state of Idaho nor by the citizens in Idaho, but rather is owned by the federal government of the United States of America. And this is very likely a problem wherever you live as well, if you live in the West. Tons of land in Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Montana, Alaska, 90% of Nevada, which is just absurd, right? Tons of land all throughout the West is actually owned not by the citizens of those states, not by even the state governments in those states, but by the federal government of the United States with their cronies hanging out in Washington. Tell me that's not egregious. It is wrong and unconstitutional, and it is a total abomination. Wealth, prosperity, and freedom all stem from land ownership, so the control of this land by the federal government represents nothing more than an assault on Idahoans' liberty and prosperity. Completely agree. The federal government has no right to this land, period. Again, completely agree. As a major part of my Keep Idaho, Idaho plan, as governor of Idaho, I will see to it that Idaho's land is taken back by the state of Idaho and that it is properly adjudicated back to the people. Which one of the things I appreciate about this plan is that he actually seeks to give the land not to the state of Idaho, but rather to the citizens in Idaho, which I think is incredibly important. This will open up entire new industries and near unlimited prosperity for business, enterprise, entrepreneurship, energy independence, and for Idahoans in general. And yes, I know how to fight for land that is rightfully ours and how to win. And I've already proven that I'm willing to take the fight all the way to the end. He, of course, went to prison for this. When I'm governor, Idaho will take back our land, period. And this, again, is something that I think is incredibly important. The federal government owns way, 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 way too much land. And this land is not actually their land, right? This land is our land from California to the New York Islands, right? No, seriously though, this land belongs to us. It doesn't belong to them. It should be our land. Why? I mean, we were just talking earlier about how there is a crisis of decreasing farming in this country. Well, obviously, these farmers are already starting at a disadvantage when 61% of the land in the state of Idaho, which is an agricultural giant, it's the number one industry in this state, and our state is one of the top states for producing agricultural product. And 61% of that land, they don't even have access to because that land belongs to the federal government. Again, not the states, not the individual Idahoans, but to the federal government. And again, this is likely true if you live in the West. If you live in the East, this may not be the case. You'd have to check. But if you live in the West, this is likely true for you, even if you're not actually from the state of Idaho. If you're living in Washington, Oregon, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, this is likely true for you. And no, I'm not talking about things like Native American reservations. In fact, I'm not even really talking about national parks, because even if you take into account a lot of different national parks, that still doesn't account for the gross number of land. And I mean gross as in disgusting number of the percentage of land, I should say, the gross percentage of land that is actually owned here in these different various Western states by the United States federal government. It's completely absurd. It's completely absurd. The land does not belong to them. It has never belonged to them. And frankly, if you're talking about legitimately, it will never belong to them. Now, in an illegitimate way, meaning they have the firearms and so they're going to do what they want, yeah, it does actually belong to them. But nonetheless, you want to talk about legitimately, this land does not belong to them. It belongs to the people of the various states, and it does need to be taken back. Governor Ammon does seek indeed to take it back, and for that, I will be voting for him November 8th, 2022. Let's go to the fifth reason. An executive order to end abortions. An executive order to end abortions. This is something that is definitely needed. I am a strong believer in our system of checks and balances, and do not believe that executive orders should be used by the executive branch as a means to create law without the need for the legislative branch. However, executive orders can and should be used when someone's life, liberty, or property is in jeopardy, and there is not sufficient time for the legislature to convene to prevent it. Every moment of every day in Idaho, the lives of our precious unborn babies lie in jeopardy of being terminated by the cruel and barbaric process known as abortion, which is nothing less than murder and actual infanticide. As governor, my very first action on day one of my term will be to sign an executive order recognizing life as beginning at conception and giving the full force and measure of Idaho law to protect such life from that moment forward. Simply put, I will end all abortion by executive order on day one of my governorship. I will then work diligently with the legislature to enshrine the protection of the lives of our babies while honoring the glory of motherhood and protecting our mothers at the same time by amending our state constitution with clear laws and plain language forever prohibiting this heinous crime. Now, of course, we all know how important this kind of thing is, right? Abortion is obviously an egregious national sin. 900,000 to 1.1 million babies a year are slaughtered in the womb in this country. And of course, this could actually be less of a fight than it was initially when he had first proposed this. Because remember, when he had first proposed this, Roe v. Wade had not yet been taken down. Well, now Roe v. Wade has been taken down, which means this can be enforced without the federal government actually throwing a stink about it. Now, beforehand, he was going to try and enforce this even with the federal government throwing a stink about it, which I greatly appreciate, of course, because the states should have said, when all of this was coming about, hey, we don't really care what the court says. You don't have a right to legislate from the bench, and we are absolutely positively in no way, shape, or form going to accept the systemic slaughter of 900,000 babies in the womb. That's what the states should have said. But now, of course, he doesn't even have to go that far. Now he can just say, well, Roe v. Wade is overturned. We have the right to set up laws we see fit here, which is the way it's always been, as far as legitimately speaking. Obviously, as far as what's written in law, that's not the case, but I digress. And we're going to push forward a complete and total elimination of abortion in this state. Now, one of the things I greatly appreciate about this also is he does talk about how we're going to enshrine this in the Idaho Constitution. We're going to use plain language to enshrine this in the Idaho Constitution. And this is one of the incredibly important things here, we are going to protect the mothers as well so that we don't have problems such as, threat to the mother's life being considered an illegitimate reason, or so we don't have problems such as women being arrested for miscarriages or something like that, which is not something that I think was ever going to happen legitimately anyways. But nonetheless, it is one of the things that people on the left say they are worried about. And Ammon Bundy has decided to preempt that by saying we will be sure to protect the mothers as well. He also, which I think is fantastic, wants to enshrine this in the state constitution rather than just simply enshrining it in state law. Look, if I pass a law, somebody else can come back later and get rid of it, right? But it's significantly harder to amend or disamend the Constitution of a certain state. If we set up in our Idaho Bill of Rights that, hey, life begins at conception and we are going to defend life, which begins at conception with the full, excuse me, with the full force of Idaho law, that, in my opinion, that makes it not only a completely, more, yeah, how do I put this? Not only is that much more beneficial to our cause of total abolition of abortion, but it also is going to make it a lot more difficult for people to get rid of if and when the left does eventually retake control, because we live in a constitutional republic. People have the right to vote, and eventually there is going to be people who are more left leaning, excuse me, in power. And if those people are not able to get enough votes to actually amend the Constitution to get rid of something like this, then they're not going to be able to actually stop the criminalization of abortions in this state. And again, if you're not living in the state of Idaho, this is something you should still be supporting in whatever your local state is. Abortion is a crime against humanity on par with the Holocaust, on par with the genocide of Native Americans, on par with the systemic racism and slavery that was perpetrated in this United States for the first 150 some odd years. Excuse me, that's actually incorrect. 1865, 1788, we became a country. 77 years, grossly incorrect. My apologies. Um, it's on par with these things. In fact, with the slavery thing, you could say it's actually much worse because would you rather be enslaved or dead? I think being a slave would be better than being dead, personally. Obviously, we're talking about things which are terrible. Would you like terrible option A or terrible option B? But if I had a choice between working for somebody who might be cruel, but being alive, and not being alive, I think I might go with the latter, right? At least the former includes, no, I don't know, being alive, right? Absolutely want this to be enshrined in the Constitution. Greatly support that, the idea of complete and total abolition of abortion. I am an abolitionist. With the exception of threat to the mother's life, I do not see any legitimate reason for abortion whatsoever. Not if it's before a certain set time, like 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 6 weeks. Not if it's something like, oh, well, um, am not financially stable or not mentally stable or whatever. Sorry, keep it in your pants if that's the case. And as far as is things like rape, my heart certainly goes out to rape victims. I would even be willing, and I'm not actually kidding about this. I would even be willing to create a system where the state actually helped to pay for the counseling for the mother's trauma as well as the pregnancy costs if a woman, was actually raped. I would have no problem with that because they obviously went through something that's completely disgusting and egregious, and we want to preserve the life of the baby while also preserving the mental fortitude of the woman who had nothing to do with bringing that baby in to the world. But nonetheless, the punishment should not be upon the baby; it should be upon the rapist, who should be executed. And by the way, 1977 Coker versus Georgia um, actually said that it is unconstitutional to execute rapists. And I think that that's completely disgusting and egregious. We want to sit here and talk about protection of women, and yet we as a nation have decided that we can't actually do anything serious about the fact that there are men out there, piggish, disgusting, vile, nearly subhuman men, if I could be perfectly frank, who will actually violate women in this egregious and sexual way. They should be punished to the highest extent of the law. I think death penalty should absolutely be on the table. Coker v. Georgia needs to be repealed, but I digress on that. I mean, no disrespect to a lot of conservatives out there who want to go after like a Bergefell versus Hodges and stuff like that. But we got bigger fish to fry. Roe v. Wade was one of them. Coker versus Georgia is another. And there's a couple others I could think of, but nonetheless, the point is punish the rapist. Don't punish the children. Um, I greatly appreciate this point number 5 from Bundy as well, and I think this is another great reason to be voting for him. All right, so let's go to some other things here that I think would be good to talk about. So We're not obviously going to read everything here because, as you can see, there's quite a bit of it. But look at some of the things that we have here as far as the Keep Idaho plan. Elimination of property tax, personal income tax, personal property tax, and taxes being only collected through consumption, meaning the taxes that we would still have would be things like sales tax or consumption tax. These are part of what Governor, or hopefully soon to be Governor Bundy, would want to put forward. Um, Also wants to address the affordable housing crisis, health freedom, and bodily autonomy. So, not allowing the state to actually force you to be vaccinated or wear masks or anything like that. Taking back Idaho's land, which we already discussed, making Idaho a financial freedom state, which we'll actually click on that one so we can explain a little bit more about what it is. But before we do, recognition, excuse me, and acceptance of prominent cryptocurrencies by the state. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that one, but nonetheless, it would at least allow people to use cryptocurrency as a legitimate currency, and I think that would greatly improve the buying power of a lot of individuals here in the state of Idaho. Restoration and restitution laws, empowering communities to end drug abuse, empowering police to act according to their conscience, eliminating civil asset forfeiture, and ending cronyism and corruption, an executive order to end abortion, education freedom, so things like school choice and stuff like that, or the right to homeschool your children, gun rights and defense of the Second Amendment, Idaho State Healthcare Exchange, addressing Obamacare, parental rights, ending welfare, elimination of states' licensure, changing the culture of government, and using blockchain technology for state interactions. So let's go ahead and click on a couple of these and see what exactly is being talked about. Obviously, a lot of them are going to be self explanatory, but not all of them are. So let's look at making Idaho a financial freedom state. A huge problem with government overreach today is its unlawful, intrusion into the financial lives of individuals. People just don't have financial privacy anymore, and no matter which way you try to spin it, our current system is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. To put it plainly, if you don't have financial privacy, then you can never be financially free. Therefore, there are a handful of states like Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware who have introduced laws for individuals and corporations to maintain financial privacy for their own residents and for out of state entities as well. This has become a great source of revenue for some states as it allows the state to offer a genuine service to corporations and other foreign entities to bring capital into their states and to generate revenue through the necessary fees associated with state services. Unfortunately, Idaho has no real beneficial businesses or personal privacy laws. As governor, I will advocate for a complete set of constitutional rules to make Idaho the gold standard for financial privacy, even better than Switzerland. These laws will ensure that Idahoans' privacy is never breached in alignment with the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. This will additionally bring in millions of dollars in out of state revenue into Idaho's treasury, effectively increasing Idaho's revenue base without costing Idahoans a single penny. Additionally, this will bring untold billions of dollars of capital into Idaho's financial sector, creating new jobs and increased economic output. Idaho will become synonymous with both financial privacy and prosperity, ultimately giving Idaho's the greatest potential for financial freedom. Excuse me. Vitamin water doesn't taste the best, but I guess it's incredibly healthy. So, there's that. Anywho, so financial privacy is obviously an incredibly big deal. There are states out there, states which are even kind of liberal, like Delaware and Nevada, which do protect. Excuse me, I cannot talk today. Man, I don't even drink. I sound like I've had like a couple beers. Anyways, um, which do protect your financial privacy, and obviously, people, Swiss bank accounts at this point have become famous for the financial privacy that are provided therein. Um, Bundy would like Idaho to be one of those areas where we have financial privacy. And I, of course, would completely and totally agree with that. And, a lot of people would say, well, yeah, but doesn't that mean you'd have people who are, um, giving money to the state here, or excuse me, to bringing money into the state, excuse me, for potentially illegal purposes? And that could be. That kind of stuff does happen. The thing is, if you really want freedom, you have to be willing to deal with the potential for people to abuse it. I'll give you a perfect example in trial by jury. Sometimes, because we have trial by jury, and also because we have a system where you're innocent until proven guilty and that you must be proven guilty beyond any reasonable doubt, because we have those things set up, sometimes criminals are able to actually get away with their crimes. Maybe the jury is hung because they can't actually agree on whether or not there's sufficient evidence. Or maybe the evidence isn't sufficient to eliminate all reasonable doubt. Or maybe somebody was able to actually catch somebody doing something illegal, but the way that they did it violated the Fourth Amendment because they searched the person without some warrant, specifically stating what is to be searched and stuff like that, and therefore it has to be thrown out of court. And does that stuff suck? Of course it does. Of course it does. We never want people to actually, get out of jail free, so to speak. If they're legitimately committing a crime, we want them to be legitimately punished for that crime. However, if somebody is wanting to have a system where those things are set in place, if you're innocent and you want a jury of your peers to be able to look over the evidence to prove your innocence, or if you're innocent and don't want the cops barging into your house saying we're going to search this just because, or if you're innocent and you don't want the state to say, hey, we don't actually have enough evidence to put him away, beyond any reasonable doubt or anything like that, but we have enough for us to be convinced as the prosecutors. Well, then you're just going to have to deal with those sorts of things. Another perfect example: gun rights. If we have easy access to firearms, then that means people with bad intentions have easy access to firearms. But if you want people with good intentions to have easy access to firearms, then you just simply have to roll with the punches. Is there things you can do to try and prevent that? Like, for example, punishing people strongly when they do get caught? Of course. Another example, maybe setting up a system where certain individuals are not able to purchase firearms, maybe because they're younger than the age of 18, or maybe because they are not able to provide an ID or something like that. Of course, you can do something like that, right? But if you want to have freedom, you're going to have to deal with the fact that there are people who can use those freedoms to abuse the system. And I think you have a similar thing that would be going on here, right? Is it possible that people would be bringing in money into the state in order to avoid paying taxes or money launder or stuff like that? Yeah, it is. Totally is. Totally is. Is it worth it so that we have financial privacy so that the state isn't able to pry into your bank account, so that companies aren't able to pry into your bank account? Yeah, yeah, it is. At least I think it is. I would hope you guys think it is as well. What are some other stuff here? Empowering police to act according to their conscience. What exactly does he mean by that? Actually, let's go with the empowering communities to end drug abuse one first. I am diametrically opposed to the use of mind-altering drugs like marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, etc. I believe they are a bane to society and one of the tools of the devil to destroy the family unit. I abhor and despise drugs and the use of drugs, including many legal and approved pharmaceutical drugs, which oftentimes exceed the damage, excuse me, exceed the damage and psychotropic effects of street drugs, but are simply approved by our government. That being said, the prevention of the use of drugs as it is something that one does to their own body should be left to the jurisdiction of families and churches. Preachers, churches, fathers, and families should be those who prevent the use and abuse of drugs, not government. In other words, it is not the proper role of government to involve itself in what people do with their own bodies. If we were against drugs, then we should let churches, preachers, and community leaders stand against it. We shouldn't be taking nonviolent drug users and imprisoning them at great cost to the personal lives, their families, and at great cost to the taxpayer. The war on drugs is a perfect example of a government program that began with good intentions but had unbelievable unintended consequences. Enforcement of drug laws has become the number one tool for the violation of basic civil rights in America for decades. And I personally have actually been on the receiving end of this, having a lot of my rights violated because people suspected me for things like marijuana use, which, for the record, I don't actually even think that marijuana is a significant problem. If we're going to allow people to be smoking cigarettes, eating Big Macs, drinking coffee, etc., I guess coffee probably isn't as bad for you as marijuana is, but I digress, right? People drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and eating Big Macs, but we're not going to allow them to smoke joints. I think that's completely ridiculous. It's just a matter of scientific fact at this point that beer and nicotine are both worse for you than marijuana is. That's not an endorsement of marijuana smoking, by the way. I want to be clear about that. But it's absolutely absurd for people to put that on level with things like cocaine and not in, on the level of things like, you know, alcohol or nicotine or stuff like that. And I, for one, I'll just be perfectly frank with you guys. I, for one, am completely and totally for the legalization of marijuana. It is the primary cause excuse for civil asset forfeiture, which is the way that the government can steal your stuff without consequence, and is the main reason why America has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Even though the United States only represents 4.4% of the world population, we have 22% of the world's prisoners. To be fair, that number isn't entirely true when you take into account things like, Saudi prisons, Russian prisons, Chinese prisons, where they don't necessarily keep good records because they're doing evil things to their prisoners. But nonetheless, the point still stands. If you look at the free world, we have a much larger number of people incarcerated than other areas in the free world. We imprison more people here than anywhere, and guess what? Idaho leads the charge, imprisoning more people for minor drug possession charges, even though they've never committed any other crime, and most drug possession was nonviolent and victimless. In other words, nobody got hurt but they themselves. Of course, incarcerating them only takes nonviolent criminals and turns them into hardened, potentially violent criminals who then struggle to get a job or reassimilate into society. By the way, if you question this, look up Portugal and their drug laws and the results of their drug laws over the last 2 decades. It has worked swimmingly, spectacularly. It's actually quite amazing. We already, by the way, just so we're clear here, check this out. Incarceration rates comparing Idaho and founding NATO countries. So this is incarceration rate per 100,000 people. You can see Iceland incarcerates 38 people per 100,000, Denmark 59, Netherlands 59, Norway 74, going all the way up. You got Canada 114, you got the United States as a whole 698, Idaho 734. Idaho incarcerates 734 people per 100,000. And most of those, in fact, I believe it's something like 40%, are nonviolent drug users. And most of those drug users, by the way, are marijuana smokers, not things like, fentanyl or things of that nature, though, of course, that does happen. We already have solid proof about what would happen if we stopped incarcerating people for drug use, since Portugal began doing so in 2001. We have literally 20 years of history and proof to know what positive results could be expected. By the way, I have a list of references down here. I'll actually be providing a link to this website in case anybody wants to check it out for themselves. In short, not incarcerating people for using drugs in Portugal changed nothing statistically. The same amount of people who used drugs before are still using drugs now. What did change was the number of imprisonments and drug-related deaths, as well as the number of HIV infections. In other words, ending incarceration of drug users radically lowered the number of deaths, HIV infections, and crime. But it did not reduce the amount of people who were taking drugs. That stays the same regardless. Idaho can expect the same. To radically lower the number of imprisonments and likewise to reduce the number of drug-related deaths and the high level of recidivism we have in the state of Idaho. And hang on, let me reread that. Likewise, to reduce the number of drug-related deaths and the high level of recidivism we have with drug users in the state of Idaho. Finally, I will personally encourage our pastors, preachers, bishops, and faith leaders to stand up with fathers and community leaders to stand boldly against drug use, because the solution to the drug use problem are fathers, families, and faith. It is not the government. I completely agree with that. There is a list here of different references that you can look into for yourself. We obviously won't have time to look into them all. Here we have empowering police to act according to their conscience. Police officers who are executing their jobs according to the law, upholding the Constitution, and with the fear of God deserve both our admiration and our respect. Unfortunately, corrupt bureaucrats have created an environment where police officers are torn between following their conscience and doing what's right, or otherwise risking losing their jobs and their livelihood. It is just not right. We ask our police officers to swear an oath to defend the Constitution, and then bureaucrats threaten them with a loss of their livelihood if they don't violate the Constitution and the very oath they made to defend it. I want to protect our righteous police officers and empower them to act according to their conscience. While it is necessary for police officers to obey any lawful command from a superior, we must also allow officers to reject unlawful orders that violate the Constitution or their own conscience without the threat of losing their jobs or their livelihood. As governor, I will advocate for new rules and statutes that both protect whistleblowers in police departments and that empower police officers to act according to their conscience without fear of losing their jobs. Get another drink here. We're just about done, only because, like I said, I'm not going to be able to read through all of this stuff. Let's look at some of the stuff for parental rights. God has given parents the duty and responsibility of rearing their own children. No government has the right to usurp a parent's authority over the livelihoods of their minor children. Parents have the right to determine how they choose to raise their children, teach their children, feed their children, and all other decisions related to their children shall not be infringed upon. As governor of the state of Idaho, I will work diligently with our legislature to make sure parental rights are properly ensconced is not a word, ensconced in our state constitution and statutes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right either, but that's how I've always pronounced it. But I've only ever actually seen it written, never heard it read. So if I'm pronouncing that wrong, somebody let me know. In particular, this will preserve religious liberties, homeschooling, and a parent's right to refuse medical treatment, vaccines, and the like for their children. I am also a supporter of the Parental Rights Amendment. Look into that for yourselves if you guys are interested. We are running short on time, so I am not going to look into it personally. And I do apologize for that, but unfortunately, we are already well over the hour. Last thing we'll look at here is changing the culture of government. It is no mystery that the Idaho state government, like nearly all government entities, functions inefficiently and with the general bad customer service. Excuse me. Which, of course, he puts in air quotes because that's not exactly what you would call it, but, for lack of a better term. If you've ever dealt with a government agency, then you know how frustrating and annoying it can be. Generally speaking, our government operates inefficiently because it is a monopoly. It has no competition, so citizens can't go elsewhere. We're stuck with what we've got. Additionally, government employees have no incentive to serve the citizens since they can treat you terribly and never face any consequences. As a result, the culture of government employees has become toxic for citizens. As governor, I will see to it that we change the culture of government so that government employees realize that they work for the people and not against them. They are servants of the citizenry. They are not their rulers. And if they don't properly serve the people with good intentions, good customer service, and general competence, then they can and will be terminated. In other words, we will introduce negative consequences for bad service from government employees. We will make the Idaho government the most customer service oriented and most efficient government operation in the country and hopefully the world. And there's plenty of other stuff that we could be talking about here as well. Obviously, there are 23, as you can see here, different tabs that we could be reading here. There's also his 3 lies that you've been told, how COVID should have been handled. He's got a little about thing here talking about, himself personally, his obviously the Keep Idaho Idaho plan that we're looking at now, the issues, so on and so forth. A lot of very interesting stuff here. I would certainly recommend you guys check out this website. Again, it is votebundy.com. One more time, that is votebundy.com. You can get little pamphlets for his Keep Idaho Idaho plan. You can donate to him if you like. You can go to the store here if you like. There's a contact point here at some, let me see. He does allow you to contact him. That's how I got my interview. Phone number right here, P.O. box, all this other kind of stuff. A lot of very interesting and useful things. Obviously, there's a frequently asked questions, different videos and press releases, all this other kind of stuff. I think that this is a very important election. Every election is. And I also think that this man is one of the better candidates in the country. And I do certainly hope to see him as governor here in my state. Very often we've had people who have tried running for various positions, but have not been able to get them because of lack of name recognition. We had Walt Bays running for governor in 2014. Rex Rammel was running for governor here back in 2010. There's another gentleman whose name I can't remember. There was one guy actually whose name, he changed his name to Pro Life as a protest, and then just ran like every year since the 90s. It was pretty funny, but nonetheless, um, obviously was never going to win. But the point is, a lot of these guys could never get anywhere because they couldn't win. Even guys who have some decent name recognition, like Raul Labrador, who I'm going to be supporting for Attorney General this election, or Russ Fulcher, who I'm going to be supporting to get reelected to the House of Representatives this election. They had some decent name recognition, but they were outside of the good old boys club, and so as a result, would lose to people like Butch Otter or the current governor Brad Little, who, to be fair, is nowhere near as bad as Butch Otter. In fact, while I disagree with Butch Otter in a lot of ways, Butch Otter was, in my opinion, actually a very good governor. Um, he not everything that we would want. He's a little bit more neocon than we would like, but nonetheless, I think he was a pretty solid, pretty good governor. And I happen to have met the guy. Idaho's kind of small, right? So I've met a lot of these guys. I've met Ammon. Met Governor Otter. He's a good guy. I have a lot of respect for Governor Otter, is what I'm trying to say. But nonetheless, I would have preferred somebody like Russ Fulcher, Raul Labrador, somebody like that to win. But they don't have the name recognition or the ability to fight these guys in the good old boys club. Bundy has both, right? Bundy's got a solid base behind him. He's got solid name recognition, and he's got a fighting record. And this state is a state that, while it certainly is more red than most, it definitely has its fair share of problems. Doug Wilson had a conference this year, 2022, that was being watched by the FBI, and members of his congregation in 2020 were arrested for having a psalm sing, a public outdoor psalm sing, which is exactly what it sounds like, just nothing more than a singing of psalms. The church gets together, starts singing psalms, and people got arrested for it, right? This is a state where I can't remember the woman's name, but there was a woman in Meridian, took her child to a park, ends up being arrested for it. And on top of that, Governor Little is an absolute coward. In fact, he refuses to even debate. He said he will not debate. At this point now, of course, it's too late. We only got 5 days left until the election. I personally think if you're unwilling to debate, you should be immediately disqualified from running. I believe that very strongly. But nonetheless, you know, we had Todd Engel running for a state senator position. We had Eric Parker running for a state senator position. These guys don't have the name recognition, and so they can't win. Ammon does. He has the fighting chance, and he's in a state that doesn't realize it's being pushed around by the government as much as it is, wants to be freer, wants to be more conservative, wants to be more traditional. He is willing to provide that, at least so he says. Obviously, if he isn't that guy, we'll call him out on it, right? Ain't nobody who's going to call people out more than this particular program. I think we have a legitimate shot here to keep Idaho, pun totally intended. I don't know if it's a pun, but plug totally intended. And I think that this absolutely positively is the man that we should be voting for 2022. We will be following the election on November the 8th, giving you guys some of the results and stuff like that. I will be voting for Ammon Bundy this year, as well as Scott Cleveland for senator, Russ Fulcher for representative, Raul Labrador for attorney general, as well as various other positions in the local government here. And wherever you are in your various state, if you're not here in the state of Idaho, if you are here in the state of Idaho, please consider voting for Ammon Bundy 2022. We need your vote. We need every vote. It is our civic duty to vote. And I think it is incumbent upon us to be voting for the right people, not the people who were shutting down churches of Stephen Crane, Tim Remington, Doug Wilson, so on and so forth. Not the people who were saying we need to start tracking people like the mayor over there in Mountain Home, right? Because of their unwillingness to wear masks and submit to to daddy state. I think Bundy needs to be the person who we get in there, and I hope you guys will vote for him as well. If you're not in Idaho, though, find candidates who are speaking about these same things. Eliminate abortion, eliminate property tax, eliminate the income taxes, right? Legalize pot. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal, but we don't need more people in prison for smoking a plant when you can go down to the bar and get smashed drunk and have sex with a barely 18-year-old, right? But we're going to say that somebody can't smoke joints and eat Cheetos at their own home. Let's make this country truly great again, not in the Donald Trump way. Although I do think Trump did some good things, I think he also did some terrible things, and ultimately he was a net loss for the conservative movement. I think there's no doubt about that. Let's truly, genuinely make this country great again by voting in local elections for candidates who want to defend our Constitution, who want to defend our traditional values, who put God above all else and family right thereafter, with the state being a close 27th, right? That was a joke, by the way. Let's do it. We can do it. November the 8th. Come on, guys. Let's do this. November the 8th is the next time we're going to be with you, by the way. That is, of course, going to be um, the election day. So we'll have a whole bunch of updates, not only on what's going on here in Idaho, but also what's going on across the rest of the country. I appreciate every single one of you guys who is here. If you are here, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you have not done so. Hit this bell to get notified every time that we go live here on the Synagogue News. We post episodes of the Watchdog every Tuesday and Thursday. Please consider following us on various social media platforms. For example, we are on Minds, Gab, and Parler, which are all the alternative social media platforms that we highly recommend you get on, as well as Twitter and Facebook. You can also, of course, like us on Rumble, which is where we have our backup channel in the event that we ever get censored here. Certainly do appreciate anybody who follows us there as well. Also, you can contribute to us financially if you fancy, if you find this news to be good news and think that we are providing clarity in this absolute glut of podcasting and news and stuff like that that we have here, not only on the internet, but of course on television as well. Certainly do appreciate anybody who gives to us there. You can give either to the Patreon, which is a subscription service you'll be giving every month if you decide to give there. It is not something that we have tiered, so you can give as much or as little as you'll like. But also, if you don't want to be committing yourself to a subscription, you can also give to our PayPal one time if you want to give a one-time donation. And links to both of those are floating around in the description. This has been the Watchdog on the Synagogue News. We remind you to think like a Neanderthal on this channel. We're just going to own the things which the left says about us. And friends, I want to ask you guys the question. First, I want to remind you to be watchdogs. But I want to ask you guys the question. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise? Shalom, friends.